I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarland. Today is Friday, 1/23/2026. Welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us and just appreciate you. We're going to continue a conversation we began last week. My guest last week and today is Debbie Richmond, who is an advocate for seniors. And we're going to talk about the work that she is doing, has been doing, and as always, these programs are unscripted, so we're able to go far and wide and talk about a variety of other things that maybe include, as we did last week, current affairs. But let me properly introduce my guest, Debbie Richmond. She is the Elder Advocate and Dementia Care Specialist for START Senior Solutions. Their website is www.startsenior.solutions.org. Debbie's email, if you want to reach out to her, is debbie@startsenior.solutions.org. And what we want to do is sort of delve into her 30 plus years working with older adults in a variety of settings. She's worked in long-term care, assisted and independent living, memory care, and community. And her areas of expertise are related to dementia, both in the person living with and the person's caregiving. She's done work or presentations across the country, both for professionals and for caregivers. And her current role as an elder advocate for START Senior Solutions, she focuses primarily on families struggling with dementia diagnoses and providing support to access needed resources. And so the challenge, we want to go over the challenge of dementia care and dementia care management, things that are related, things like behavior, but like housing, like what do you do on a daily basis for someone or for a family that's experiencing dementia? And so got a variety of questions that we want to jump into. Debbie, first of all, good to see you again. Thank you for coming back and doing part two of our conversation last week. And as I said before we began, I want to make sure that over the course of this hour, you've had a chance to say all you need to say to our listeners and viewers about the topic that you're the expert in, dementia care and dementia awareness. So we want to make sure that happens today. And feel free to move the conversation to emphasize things that we should pay more attention to. That's what I'm expecting, hoping that you'll be able to do. But the general questions to set this in motion, what does being equipped to be a caregiver really mean? And how can somebody tell if they're approaching the caregiver role with proper or with unrealistic expectations? So sort of do some groundwork, terminology, definition, defining, framing this whole question of caregiving when it comes to dementia care. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, and thanks for having me back again. It's nice to see you, and I'm looking forward to having more conversation today about whatever we end up talking about. I think one of the difficult parts about being a caregiver is that there really is no manual. When people are entering into this experience of being a caregiver, whether it's around a dementia diagnosis or just an aging parent, an aging spouse, it doesn't have to be dementia. Some of the scenarios are almost the same, but you learn by doing. Mm-hmm. And some of that involves learning by maybe not doing things in the best way the first time. It's a difficult road. And I think the challenge comes where particularly younger adults, so for conversation purposes, let's say 30s or 40s, but it can also continue, but that younger population that may also have children, and they're trying to manage taking care of a family, but taking care of an aging parent. It's a challenging situation. It can be an expensive situation. And in our society, it's very common to not want to talk about what happens when you get old until you get old. Mm-hmm. It seems to be a conversation where in classic Minnesota form, if you don't talk about it, therefore it won't happen. And so oftentimes people are very ill prepared for even things like emergency decision making. Somebody falls and goes to the hospital and has to have surgery, and maybe they're not able to clearly state their wishes. Is there a power of attorney in place? And so very simple things can cause a lot of challenge to a family in a caregiving situation. As far as being equipped, particularly once you have a diagnosis, whether that diagnosis is dementia or something else, understanding what might happen next, what will happen next, however you want to think about that. These diagnoses are progressive. So things are going to get worse. They're not going to stay how they are today. We talk a lot with caregivers about embracing today, enjoying the time that you have and creating positive memories, but there also needs to be a plan. And so often people wait until there is a catastrophic situation before, and then they don't have a plan. They haven't looked at possibilities for alternative housing. They haven't thought about home care. They're not ready legally and financially. And so instead of just dealing with the person, now you're dealing with all of these other things. I'll use a personal example, although not dementia related. A little over 5 years ago, on a random day in August in 2020, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I thought that my parents had had conversations about, and much to my surprise and somewhat distress, I discovered that other than a power of attorney, which I was, so I knew that, there had been no conversation about anything. And so you're trying to process a diagnosis that now, a couple of days prior didn't exist, and now you have a doctor saying maybe a couple of months without treatment. And there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen, a lot of task. The beauty about task is a lot of times you can do those tasks ahead of time. Now, it requires people to think about things they don't want to think about. What happens if there is a terminal diagnosis? What happens if someone's dementia becomes unmanageable at home and they need to move? All those things we don't want to talk about. My role is to help facilitate some of that conversation, and in some cases in more of a casual way, because hopefully they call us before it's an emergency. So we can sit down with the family and say, and it's usually the first thing I start talking about is legal and financial. Some of the legal things are super, super easy and super, super fast to do. I happen to be a notary, so a power of attorney is something that if people are ready to do it, can be done in a matter of minutes in their kitchen. It doesn't require an attorney necessarily unless you have a really complex living situation, which a lot of the folks that I deal with don't. Their life isn't terribly complicated. Talking about advanced care planning, which is a term or a phrase that's used as we get older about what to do if, what if. It's a great question. What if, and then fill in the blank. Whatever that situation might be. And it could be around a diagnosis. It could be just advanced care planning. How do you want things as you approach the end of your life? What do you want to have in place? There are so many things that can be done ahead of time and can be put away in a safe place until you need them. So that if there is a diagnosis also going on, you can focus on that individual, focus on their care, their well-being, your care and well-being, because self-care is a huge part of being a caregiver. And it's probably the thing that most of us are the worst at. I think a lot of people really hesitate and struggle sometimes with self-care because it takes time. So you have to schedule it. It's usually not organic, so you have to be very deliberate and very intentional about that. But it is a key piece of being a caregiver. So there are so many things people can do in advance that I think in terms of being equipped, that is one of the most significant pieces of advice I would give people is think about the future. Ask yourself those what if questions. and don't wait until it's an emergency, because then you're going to be forced into decisions that you're not prepared to make. And then you don't have as many options.
You said that, caregiving is something that, as you say, we're unprepared for. And the reason, in part, is that caregiving really, and most likely, will take over every corner of a person's life. So we're having this conversation now, but give more information on how someone can understand if their commitment to give care is overwhelming their capacity. I mean, some people, burn out, their health, the caregiver's health fails, their sleep, their spirit, it's a lot of ways that the caregiver is impacted by wanting to do the right thing and caring for an elder who's experiencing dementia. So what do you do about that? How does planning, as you said, becoming equipped, help you face those challenges?
First and foremost, I try to ask questions about family structure. Are there siblings? Are there friends? Are there extended family members? I love the phrase, and I'm stealing it, but it takes a village.
Mm-hmm.
If particularly if you're going to take care of somebody at home, which I will always advocate for, home is the best place for people to be for as long as is possible. But if you're a caregiver for someone, particularly with dementia, it's a 24/7 job plus. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful book that's been out for a very, very long time, and I don't know what edition it is today, called The 36-Hour Day, which is really a fabulous resource about, particularly with dementia, the caregiver rarely sleeps. They're sleeping with one eye open. They're hyper aware of situations all the time, because sometimes people with dementia might have behaviors. Their sleep-wake cycle might be disturbed. They don't sleep well at night. They sleep all day. There's all sorts of factors that could come up in an individual situation.
Take a second and explain that range of activity, that range of behavior that caregivers have to be prepared for. Just the thought, as you said, of having to sleep with one eye open, to be constantly hyper alert. Go into that. Give me some examples. What do you mean? Is there a sense of danger, both for the health or the safety of the person experiencing dementia? Could there be a sense of danger for other people living in this space? I mean, what are the considerations that end up coming into play for caregivers?
So the first thing I'm going to say is it depends. Every dementia situation is going to be a little bit different. In general, if you have an individual who's up walking around, leaving home could be a concern, particularly in the season we are in right now in the extreme cold. If the person with the diagnosis has tried to wander or tried to leave the house, they may not know to put on a coat. They may not have proper footwear. They could get up in the middle of the night in night clothes and walk out the front door. Mm-hmm. So safety in that context. It could be somebody that isn't very steady on their feet. They could get up out of bed and they might fall if they don't remember to take their walker. So there are safety concerns like that can appear. There's also things around just not sleeping, and rummaging up and down stairs, perhaps. That may be a safety issue. They could be just going through closets, going through drawers, trying to find something, but they maybe can't verbalize what they're trying to find, what they're looking for. I know sometimes when you don't have a good schedule for a person with dementia, in other words, if you don't have them up quite a bit during the day, maybe taking short naps, their sleep-wake cycle can get disturbed. What you don't want is somebody being up all night and then sleeping all day. So to try to have that balance so that they're able to sleep at night. But something to think about here is what they did for a living. One of the first questions I ask people about sleep is, did they work the night shift? Because sometimes people that work nights, your internal body clock gets completely disrupted. Most of us are used to sleeping at night when it gets dark, unless you're used to going to work when it gets dark. And now it's time to get up. So there can be significant time confusion there. And people that have worked in a factory, could be in the medical profession that worked overnight, could be in a skilled nursing facility that worked overnight. So trying to find out as much as if it's me doing the interviewing, for example, I'm going to start to ask some of those questions. If a sleep disturbance or being up all night. I actually had a client meeting this morning. She has a spouse with severe OCD. He is up all night, very busy. He also has dementia. So that now has created a situation where she can't have him at home. She's vulnerable herself. Her health is vulnerable. And if they're going to maintain any sort of quality in that relationship, he can't live in the same space.
So
because
explain that to me. Give me more details. I mean, what do you mean? What is the why? What things happen to make it impossible for them to be in the same space?
So in her case, so this is situational, her medical condition, she's too frail. If he's up at night and he's not sleeping and he falls, she's in just a regular apartment. She now can't get him up off the floor.
Okay.
And I would guess he weighs easily more than twice her weight. Mm-hmm. So now she's having to call 911. He's in a situation where he needs not necessarily care. So like doesn't need help getting dressed, doesn't need help eating, those kinds of things. He needs some supervision though. Mm-hmm. And in order for her to provide that level of supervision, she'd never be sleeping.
Okay.
So every situation has its little nuances. And these are questions that if they contact us or contact me, we talk through and then identify the very specific resources that might be most helpful in their specific situation, if that makes sense.
It does. And last week you gave a wonderful example of a person who was sure that a man was in her room. It's a person experiencing dementia, and she just insisted that a man was in her room at night or at certain times. And the caregiving family did all the things electronically, monitoring, showing up, examining, and the result of their examination was absolutely no man was in her room, except you discovered that she was watching Dan Rather.
Yep.
And Dan Rather on our TV was the man in her room. Yep. And so the question that story triggered in me was, what if a person who has dementia is also paranoid and feels like people are out to get me? And that triggers in that person a defensive attitude where if they feel they're in imminent danger because of their dementia or illness, they would do things in their own self-defense that could be harmful to caregivers or other people. Does that ever arise as an issue, or is that taking the example too far?
No, it absolutely arises as an issue, and again, this is where knowing a specific person's symptoms, knowing their history, usually paranoia has a cause. Now, trying to find that cause in someone that has cognitive deficits can be very difficult, but you can figure it out. But to your point, when people get defensive, they will exhibit defensive behavior that can frequently be described as aggressive or negative, when in reality, it's not that. It's self-protecting. Something is triggering a reaction in them. And it's important to know about a person's history. I worked with a woman one time who had a very, very aggressive response to staff helping her shower. And we discovered that the family was not completely forthcoming with information. This woman had been brutally attacked in her 20s. And being that close, it wasn't so much the shower as it was the proximity of people in her personal space. And discovered that, clearly personal space is typically 2 to 4 feet. If you go into someone's personal space, and so if you're a caregiver and you're trying to take care of someone, and this could be a family member or on the professional side, if you're a professional caregiver, you have no information about Al, I'll just We'll just
Mhm.
pretend it's you. I don't know
Yep.
anything about you except your name.
Mhm.
And I don't introduce myself. I don't acknowledge who you are at all. I just go into your space.
Mhm.
I should not be surprised if you have a reaction to that.
Mhm.
Now you could yell at me, you could take a posture,
Mhm.
like you're going to hit me. You
Mhm.
might push me away. There's all kinds of things
Mhm.
you could do because I have not done my due diligence to approach you in an appropriate way. Ironically, next week I'll be in Mankato talking to law enforcement
Mhm.
about this specific issue because often when they get called, they're walking into something where a resident or an individual at home, something has happened, like usually like this.
Mhm.
And if they are not thoughtful in how they approach that individual, it's not going to de-escalate, it's going to escalate.
It's going to end badly. Yeah.
And so I'm going to be doing 4 trainings over a couple of weeks talking about, number one, why it's important to truly understand the person. I think we started talking a little bit last time about person-centered care, and
Mhm.
it can be person-centered anything. When you don't take the time to know something about a person you have to interact with, truthfully in any way, you should expect nothing less than them becoming defensive in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be aggressive, but you really do have to understand who that person is to some degree to be successful in the approach. And that doesn't necessarily mean whatever it is that you're trying to do is going to happen, but you're going to increase the odds and at least create an opportunity to maybe take a step back and try a little bit later. But those situations can be very real. And sometimes the caregiver is often not the best person to try to diffuse the situation, because sometimes the caregiver, particularly for a person with dementia, can momentarily be the enemy.
Mhm.
So it might be somebody else. Maybe it's a child, maybe it's a different caregiver in a skilled nursing facility or in a skilled nursing setting or in an assisted living setting. Maybe it's a different staff member. I used to notice that I never wore a uniform. My job didn't require a uniform. Sometimes reactions to uniforms could be negative. And sometimes, depending on the uniform, it could also be very positive.
Mhm.
But it would depend on the situation and how you approach. A real classic challenge for caregivers is, you want to give people choice. Al, would you like to go to Al, you have a doctor's appointment today. Would you like to go with me? I'm going to take you to the doctor. Well, I now gave you a fabulous out, and that is the ability to say no. And frequently that's what will start those negative interactions. The person doesn't want to go. They're now going to be very defensive of their personal space. And the caregiver's trying to get them to go because they have to go. And it's only going to go from bad to worse. So those can be very, very difficult situations. Sometimes, unfortunately, you do have to call law enforcement, hence why some of the training, even at home. I worked with a family one time where it was a wife taking care of a husband. He threw her against a wall.
Mhm.
That was a time to get help.
Mhm.
Now, if the world were a perfect place, which it's not, you have skills and you learn. I think last week we talked a little bit about learning, education, reading, talking to people about different ways to interact, particularly as people progress. But in this case, he escalated too fast. And there was really nothing she could do, but she always had her cell phone on her, so she was able to call 911. And he was actually placed in a memory care not long after that, because it really became a question of her safety and that it was not safe to keep him in the home anymore.
Okay. Talk about your organization. We mentioned that you are a advocate and dementia care specialist with your organization. Let's tell people about the organization, its mission, history, background.
So Tracy Keebler, who is the executive director of START, She and I met a number of years ago when we were on a committee at the University of Minnesota trying to think about how long-term care, however that was defined, could be better. And the goal of START and why she started START is really as a ministry, which is why people that access, anybody that contacts me or anybody else, there's no charge. There never is a fee for anything, whether it's one phone call or 10 or 8 meetings, it doesn't make any difference what it is. Because there are so many resources, and older adults in particular are so underserved. You know, a doctor might say, okay, you have a likely diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or some type of dementia. Good luck. And in that situation, where do they go? Who do they talk to? And START is really a resource for resources. So all of us in the company have background of some type working with older adults. So if somebody says to me, I need help finding home care. Okay, where do you live? Okay, I will put a list together. So we do all of that legwork. We don't provide the home care, so I don't go into people's homes to do the service, but I give them the resource. And it's amazing. I've only been with the company I think is around 14 years old. I've only been with the company since September, but it's amazing the sense of relief I see with clients when I can give them information and they're incredibly appreciative of just to know where to start, where to look, what to ask, questions to ask. I was with a client this morning at a care conference for her husband, and knowing questions to ask that needed to be asked in this particular situation. So I can do things like that. I can go to meetings or appointments, and I can be that translator. Long-term care is complicated. And depending on what type of service and what the particular situation is, it might be me, it might be another colleague, but we're very good at, okay, if it's this kind of appointment or this kind of situation, here are the questions we need to ask. And ultimately, Tracy often says, what are we trying to solve? What is the problem or what is the question? And from there, then you can define, okay, if you need help with A, that's this group of people. If you need help with B, because frequently clinic systems, healthcare systems, their primary focus is the service that they're providing that person that day. You don't see a lot of connection to the community. So we can help facilitate, we can be kind of a conduit, is how I have described it to people, where I can get them connected to that service and help them make those contacts with the right information, the right questions to ask, so that then they become better equipped, that word again, with what needs to happen next. And particularly with dementia, it evolves. So today they might need package ABC of services. And once that all gets in place, then maybe the next part of the conversation is, what if you need to move your husband? What area of the city? Let's go take a couple of tours so you can, and I can go along. I'm looking through a different lens. They're the family member lens. I'll ask the questions they don't want to ask.
Sure.
Or don't know to ask.
Don't know how to ask. Yeah.
It's taking all of that experience, my past, and being able to put it into that kind of situation and just see the relief that's created. Speaking as a caregiver, I'm doing a lot of that for myself because I know how to do it, which is not necessarily a good thing every day. Sometimes that's problematic. But to be able to use that knowledge to help people better navigate and take better care of themselves just is a really nice feeling. And the fact that they don't have to worry about, there's no cost. People are just amazed. Well, why don't I have to pay you? Well, because you don't. The organization has donors that support the work, and that's part of the ministry. We don't want people to have to pay, because frequently it's the people that can't pay that need the most attention and need the most support. So we take that barrier completely away.
Let me support what you're saying. I'm at your website. Maybe, Jared, you can go to the Start Senior Solutions website and pull it up. And the things you're saying, you say so clearly in the website as well. I clicked onto the About, and it lists mission, urgency, and work. So let me just share some of that language. It simply restates what you've been saying, Debbie. As a faith in action nonprofit, we renew hope for seniors and caregivers, strengthen families, and make our communities better places to live. Through planning, advocacy, and education, we help older adults manage and resolve ongoing crises and empower them to reduce the risk of future crises. We support our clients for as long as they need us and treat them with compassion every step of the way. That's awesome. And you go on. I don't know if you're able to pull this up or not. I think, yeah, there we go. So you go on. I'll look at the next part that says, just a second, our urgency. I think that's quite important. As we age, managing our health, medical costs, and basic needs can become more difficult. A single crisis, such as a fall or a diagnosis of dementia, can lead to life-changing decisions that are stressful and complex. Nearly 1 million Minnesotans are age 65 and over. In 2015, about 20% lived alone. Today, 18,000 Minnesota dementia patients live alone. Many older adults and their caregivers have nowhere to turn for help overcoming the challenges of aging and catastrophic events. That's from the Alzheimer's Association, Minnesota Department of Health. And so your work, you can explain that. Talk about the origin of the organization, how you support the organization, and how can the public support you in culling, developing, nurturing, and gathering resources to continue this work. So go ahead if you would.
So yeah, I think like I've said, and it says on the website, the number of clients so far is well over 7,000. And when you look at the number of older adults in Minnesota, that's just a tiny fraction of the number of age 65 and older in Minnesota. And we're looking at significantly high numbers now of people with Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia or other comorbidities that are more common, other diseases, with older adults. And I think as, certainly an organization that is donor-based, if people want to make a donation on the website, there's an ability for them to do that. But I would also say that, letting people know that we exist. Mm-hmm. Even though the organization has been around a little while, people look at my business card and, well, what is this? What do you do?
Sure.
And they're amazed by what we do, but then they're amazed that it's free. Mm-hmm. And that is truly a part of, the faith in action, that it's not just, like you call and we have one conversation and we're completely done, unless that's all you need. Mm-hmm. We do have folks that one phone call, they have a very specific request that they want. They're overwhelmed by trying to find the information. We give them the information, and that's great. However, the majority are people that need some sort of ongoing support. Mm-hmm. It might not be daily or even weekly, but something is happening where there's just this onslaught of decisions. I think you read something where it talks about often with dementia, there's just this huge number of decisions that all of a sudden have to be made. And again, like I mentioned before, talking about advanced planning, even if it's not a dementia diagnosis, just planning for the inevitability that we are going to age. No matter what, can't get around it. How you approach that, though, can be significantly improved with thinking about it and talking about it. And we can help with that, too, connecting people to elder law attorneys who specialize in situations around aging, and people that we've worked with for a long, long time. There's nothing in it for us, But for as long as I've been in the business, I've worked with a handful of attorneys that I know will do a fabulous job for people. Some of them will do pro bono work. Some of them don't. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, and the work, for as long as people keep aging, which they will, I have really amazing job security, frankly. But that's not why I do it. It's really more about the idea that my knowledge, my experience, personally and professionally, can help somebody else's journey maybe be a little bit less stressful and help them manage a little bit easier. I think we all know lately that there's a whole lot of stuff happening outside everybody's house, that if we can lessen some stress inside the house, that helps them in the bigger picture, I think. And sometimes it's just a voice. You know, a lot of my meetings I do virtually, but some it's just on the phone, and hearing another person's voice
I was
validate.
surprised at the number of people who are living alone with dementia. That surprises me.
Well, and oftentimes dementia, it takes a while to get undiagnosed. So for a portion at least of the disease, you know, people are pretty high functioning early in the disease process. Where people tend to start having issues is in areas of what we would call executive functioning. So things like paying bills, remembering to take medications or take the proper medication at the proper time. You don't see people have issue with, you know, they're dressing fine. These are folks that are still driving. They're very, very high functioning, but then you start noticing deficits with some of those, frankly, more complicated tasks of daily life. And when things get too frustrated or too frustrating, the tendency sometimes is they don't do them at all. And then something's going to pop up. They didn't pay a utility bill, or they didn't pay a mortgage payment. And that's usually, or I shouldn't say usually, but commonly when families may find out, boy, what's going on? And then you go into a home and there's some pretty, you know, there's some things that we look for. I remember one case where the family, they had started getting collection notices about bills and went into the home and started looking. And this was a number of years ago when CenterPoint Energy was mini Gasco and the bills were peach colored. And Xcel Energy was NSP and they were lime green.
Yep.
And this woman was organizing everything by date and color, but nothing was opened. She was just keeping them organized. She couldn't figure out or remember what she needed to do next. So following the steps. And so then the family knew that, okay, we need to, you know, we obviously needed to do some things right away with getting those bills caught up and all of that. And then, but then trying to figure out, okay, is this a person that can live at home with support? Ultimately, that was not the case. The person needed to move into a memory care setting. But there's usually a significant thing that's going to happen to cause the family to take a look. One of the things that is very common with older adults is sometimes there's not as much transparency with adult children about what's going on or if they're having medical challenges. So this is what goes back to powers of attorney and getting those documents in place, getting a release of information established at a clinic so that family can talk to the doctor, information can be exchanged. I mean, those are some of the really nice little baby steps that can happen early on to actually prevent challenges later. And I can share with you that when my mom got sick, with respect to my dad, that was one of the first things I did. I got my name on everything. I got access to his medical because I knew things were going to change. And those are things that are really very simple with, you know, getting to the right people to do. And a lot of it can be done now, even online, where you can get access to that kind of information. So it's just, there's a plethora of things. And again, I hate to use the phrase, it depends so much, but it's very situation specific. You know, there are some things that everybody needs to do, but as we work with a client, we find out their specific needs, their specific situations, and tailor what we're going to do to them. It's completely individualized. So it's not a cookie cutter service or okay, here's the format. And it differs for every single person.
Tell me about your own personal background. What's your training, first of all, and how you entered this level of work? I mentioned that you've been working with seniors or elder people for over 30 years. Tell me the story of your uh, arriving and developing expertise in this area.
So I'm a music therapist by degree, which sounds completely outside of the scope of any of this work. However, I went through music therapy school at a time when that profession was very young and not heavily utilized, and certainly not very well respected at that time. And I went to school in Wisconsin. I moved home a couple of years after I graduated from college and needed to find a job. And I worked at a place. I read an ad for actually an activity coordinator position, somebody to have fun with residents in a long-term care setting, but the person had to be able to play piano for church. And I studied piano, and so that was my first exposure. I learned very quickly that it was not at all what I expected it to be. My mother was a nurse in a nursing home, and I had a very different thought from being the required volunteer with her than when I was in the space. And I discovered some things very quickly, but I think one of the most significant is who these folks were. They had amazing stories that most people didn't take time to visit with them to hear, and the job I had allowed me to do that. Over the next several years, I evolved into more of a management role. I wanted to change their environment. I didn't want it to be what everybody thought it was. I wanted them to feel that their lives had purpose, that their stories were important. And I was at a couple of different organizations, but sort of landed in that dementia population, because I think at that time, there was never any thought about their stories. They had dementia, therefore they can't tell you their stories. Well, that's not necessarily true, but sometimes you do have to change the question. Long-term memory is very intact for a very long time, and I started learning a lot, and then I started managing. I managed a 60-bed memory care unit for about 6 years, and then I moved to another facility to manage another one, and then I went to the Alzheimer's Association for almost 7 years and really got my feet wet in a lot of different areas of care. I worked with younger people that had younger onset, so these are folks that were diagnosed under the age of 65, and their caregivers, which is a whole nother animal from somebody being diagnosed, for example, if they're 80. They've got young kids, they're looking at college expenses, how is all of that going to work? And I really started focusing then on how to support people in the community. I was involved in a large conference that was held every year for the years that I was there. But then I missed the direct care. So I went backwards a little bit into assisted living management for a little while, and then decided this was a for-profit entity. That was a bad move for me. I needed to be in the nonprofit side. Okay. And so I shifted that again and was actually doing a lot more work in training and education. I love to talk. I am not at all uncomfortable in front of people. And so I did a lot of training on the road, was presenting nationally at conferences about the importance of training staff to understand the people that they're taking care of. I will never know as much as a family member, but I want to know almost as much. And so I would ask a lot of questions, and being in various parts of the country, learning about different groups. I learned a lot when I was doing training in the South. I've done some research on the subject as well, and the importance of that person-centered focus. And as I've gotten a little bit older and at a point in my career where I can have a little bit, I don't have to work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but I need to work. This became the perfect way to take all of that and put it into this position. When I meet with people at home, at their homes, I love to talk to them. I love to hear about who they are and how they got here. And because all of that factors into what's going to happen next and what's going to work best for them next. And so I continuously learn. And I think that's a huge part of my education is you can't stop learning. And just because it works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for another.
Right.
That's my resource base, and I can say to people that, I have experience with this, but it's not the only way.
Mm-hmm.
There's other ways to do it. And again, I am just so passionate about the work. I honestly can tell you that it's the first time when I've been on call before, to put it in this context, I used to hate when the phone rang. Now when the phone rings and I see that it's a client or I see that it's someone, I know they have a question. And it doesn't make, I'm not on the phone 24/7. It's not like that at all. But when I can pick up the phone and in a couple of minutes give an answer that makes them rest a little bit easier, that's a huge plus for me for this kind of work. And it's just taken me a long time to kind of get to a place where I could do it.
What about, I'm trying to get a sense of why this work called you. It's a calling, I think, as well as, and your training has developed expertise in that area. What do you think is the reason that you selected this or that this selected you?
Well, it was a little of both. Tracy had been trying to get me to come to work for her for a while. And we would talk, our paths would cross periodically, and God loves social media. We would interact that way. I think, though, I had a pretty significant job situation last summer.
Mm-hmm.
I had an injury that required surgery, and I was on short-term disability for about 3 months. And rotator cuff, not a good thing. Don't fall down and hurt your shoulder. It's not good. But I really was at a point all of a sudden where I really wasn't sure if I wanted to do what I was doing or if I wanted to do something else, if it was time to do something else. The other piece, though, is my dad being 92 and the role that I have with his caregiving. One thing I knew I needed was absolute flexibility so that I am in control of my own schedule, my own destiny most of the time. And those two factors, I sent Tracy an email and I said, so would now be a good time to come to work? And I think she was happy when I called. And, I never wanted to be a nurse because my mother was a nurse and I saw that side of nursing. But I wanted to continue my work with older adults. Mm-hmm. And this is a way to be able to do the things that I want to do, that I enjoy doing, and I still get to learn their stories. Mm-hmm. I still get to learn about them.
So when you said that you did some speaking, including going to the South, what jumps into my mind right away? When I think South, I think Black South. I just have got in my mind a way to think about white people in the South. So what does South mean to you? First of all, where are you from? Are you a native of Minnesota?
Yes, born and raised in Minneapolis. I actually grew up in St. Louis Park. Okay,
so you know this community.
I do.
What's your lineage? Who are your parents and your parents' parents? What goes into the making of Debbie Richmond?
So on my mother's side on my mother's side of the family, it's 100% German. And there's a tiny little bit of, I want to say English. I should have had this ready. On my dad's side, however, my dad is Jewish. His father came from a part of Poland that at the time was Krakow, but Polish borders have changed a ridiculous number over the years. Mm-hmm. But he was from Poland, and then my grandmother's family was from Romania. And they were interesting. There was some interesting that was not talked about too much in the family. There were gypsies, but Romanian.
Mhm.
When I'm part of a study with Health Partners, and when they did my DNA, I'm 43% Ashkenazi Jew,
Uh-huh.
which I'm sure comes from my dad's
Mhm.
side of the family, where exactly that all fits in. But then it's primarily the German side.
Mhm.
So I'm pretty white,
Mhm.
and grew up in the suburbs. So the first time I traveled to Alabama, there were a few things that struck me right away. One was I had to get used to being called ma'am.
Mhm.
And even I have a colleague that I worked with she's part of a large healthcare organization in Atlanta, Georgia. Same thing with some of those colleagues. Everything is ma'am,
Mhm.
and it's so not Midwest.
Mhm.
Um, I also, though, I've spent some time in Louisiana as well and in Georgia. For me, I felt embraced by the culture. I
So
felt
when you
embraced
go
by the
south, are
people.
you primarily in Black South or White South?
Black South.
Okay, and there's a real difference because
So in care centers, so like
Mhm.
in a nursing center where I've done staff training,
Mhm.
it's not white.
Okay, okay.
And talk about learning, there's things I have had to learn
Mhm.
about how things work,
Mhm.
particularly in smaller southern communities like rural Alabama. Um, Everybody knows everybody. So when someone goes to a nursing home, they know everybody that's living there. They know everybody that's working there. It's a community within a community. That is very, very different than the Midwest.
Mhm.
Remarkably different. And for me, I I have never felt unwelcome or uncomfortable in those situations. What I feel is they want to tell me about themselves. They want to tell me about the community, how
Mhm.
long they've lived there, how many family members. I mean, it's amazing to me. It's
Mhm.
not unlike a slightly different shift, but I've been up on the Red Lake Reservation a couple
Mhm.
of times. Um, same same sort of experience where I willingly went to this community called Ball Club to work with elders in that community. And I think people think about those opportunities in one of two ways: that it's going to be negative in some way, or that it's going to be positive. I never felt anything but included.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's like they're so hungry for information around caregiving. Um, how do I do this? What do I do? What happens when mom doesn't remember anymore? And then particularly in the South, they would start to tell me stories about their family. Mom came from a family with 8 kids, and tell me about the family. And then all of a sudden, mom starts talking because now we've hit a sweet spot for her where
Mhm.
she remembers.
Mhm.
So what mom had for breakfast doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Talk about what mom can talk about. Let mom talk about what she needs to talk about in her context. And it was like last week with Dr. Williams
Mhm.
talking about his mother, and should she stay in, I believe it was Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri.
I think they were no, no, I don't
Maybe
think so.
not,
Mhm.
but or move her.
Mhm.
Her community was where she was. He was here,
Mhm.
but her community was where she was. And it's a much, in my outsider opinion, it's a much deeper sense of community. Community is far more present. I guess I don't want to say important, but far more present than I see that up here in the Midwest.
So as you're speaking, here's what's sort of ruminating in my head in response to your words. Um, Something about meaning making and the eagerness to tell a story, share a narrative that reflects the connections of the family, aunt this, uncle that, cousin this,
Yep.
just my place in a constellation of human beings that assembles itself as family, as neighbors, as neighborhoods, and that in that storytelling there are parables or bubbles of thought or memories. There are recollections that illustrate in a way that ends up being almost sort of iconic, or that summarize uh, uh, either an element uh, of a person's life or lived experience, or a capability to negotiate, navigate through a challenge or a change. So that kind of defines the culture, but the overall description is a place of connectivity. And I say that as distinct from what we know here in Minnesota, where we don't question who a person is and what makes them who they are and what they bring to the party. We just assume if they show up with a degree or with knowledge or with a check or with even a smile, show up friendlily. We don't feel the need to examine deeply that person's mechanism for uh, integrating the affairs of life against my mechanism to see how they are congruent. And what you just said to me is that you experienced the same kind of connectivity on the reservation as you experienced in Louisiana in the Black community. And you also said that we don't have that in the Midwest. I'm taking the Midwest to mean primarily white Midwest. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I think for me, at least in my experience, especially with dementia, I can't connect to a person effectively or I like how you said, meaning making. I wrote that down quick, where I can't do anything that someone is going to find purposeful if I don't know who they are. And that's far beyond what I see superficially.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a significant component to me of aging, and staying true to that person. When you know that they're going to lose memory, how do you help them keep memory?
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain their connection to their past, who they are, but also take that same information? And if it's me, if I'm caregiving, how do you tell me? What do you tell me? What is important to that person? Because I don't know what's important to you unless I start asking you questions or ask people around you. If you can't tell me, and maybe it's immediate family, maybe it's friends, maybe it's community, I can't presume to know that because you live here or because you do this. And some of my most significant experiences are with other people. Not all learning is textbook or webinar or class. It's being put into situations where where I am forced to adjust. What I think is the right thing to say might be the complete wrong thing. But then I need people to tell me that. I need people to explain to me in a nice way, next time it would be better if you said this or expressed it in this way, because obviously I don't have experience in every group, right, every cultural group that is known. And so, but I want to learn and I want to understand, because how I would take care of you would be very different than you would take care of me. And that's because we're two different people. That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
And so
We're
it's
out of
just
time.
that understanding.
What a wonderful conversation. I have a gazillion more questions, so we got to do this again. I'm going to
Yes,
reach
please.
back out to you. And I think this is the part I love about the conversation, where we get into how we construct realities that allow us to be the very best humans we can be. What is our duty, our obligation? What is our opportunity to know ourselves, and in knowing ourselves fully, to know others, and in knowing others, to ultimately know ourselves and know something about why we all exist, and what we are both learning, taking from, and giving to the system, the process of life and living, and how this moment connects us to everything that ever existed before and everything that will exist. And so it amplifies the power of the moment in conversation. Debbie Richmond, thank you so much for spending this time with me right now. And
Thank
I
you.
promise you I'll call you because I want to continue this conversation.
Anytime.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. I'm Al McFarland. We'll see you next time. In fact, we may be streaming again later today. We're following closely the affairs here in Minneapolis and around the country, particularly around ICE. We've got stories in the current edition of Inside News. If you go to insidenews.com, you'll see our report on the arrest or the protest by Nakima Levy Armstrong, the attorney, who, after that protest last Sunday, was arrested by the Justice Department and the FBI yesterday, I believe. And so we've got a series of stories. We're updating that on our website and in our newspaper. And we'll be doing live streaming even beyond the regular 1 o'clock time as opportunities to connect with people and share stories come available. So stay tuned, watch for notifications, subscribe and like the program, and we'll see you next time. Debbie, thank you.
Thank you.